another gargoyle story real quick because it was a very influential show. I don't know if you've ever got this question before, but a lot of my friends, years later will go back, man, that show raised a lot of budding conspiracy theorists because it exposed people to the concept of the Illuminati for for the first time. We were all kids, we weren't reading and stuff like that. And so it created this extra mythical like concept from this cartoon. So my question to you is, did you think Gargoyles will have this type of cultural impact when you were making it?
Uh, you know, uh, I guess the short answer is no. um, the longer answers is that we hoped it would. We weren't oblivious to what we were trying to do. I mean, guys like me and Frank and Michael Reeves, who was our first story editor, Jamie Thomason, our voice director, Keith David, who played Goliath. We all had tremendous ambition for the show, but we set out very consciously to make the kind of show we would like to see, and then cross our fingers that the audience agreed with us. And that was a decision we made very early on, that we weren't going to chase or try to guess at what the audience wanted. We were going to make what we wanted to make and then hope to God they liked it. And that worked for us over and over again. I'm a huge Shakespeare fanboy. In those days, before I had kids or when my kids were really young, I would go all over California, sometimes all over the country, to see Shakespeare shows. So I put a little Shakespeare in the show, and then the people working for me, they'd put Shakespeare in, hoping that, oh, there's Shakespeare, so Greg will like it. And they weren't wrong. They were pandering to me, but they weren't wrong. And so we wound up with a ton of Shakespeare in the show, and people have told me more than once, you know, I learned to love Shakespeare from Gargoyles. I saw Macbeth on Gargoyles, and then I went and read the play, or then we studied the play in high school, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so cool. And that's very gratifying to me and to all of us who worked on the show, that had that kind of effect. My personal belief is not necessarily that the Illuminati doesn't exist per se, but my personal belief is not that there's a secret society running things, because things are such a mess. If there was one secret society running everything, you'd think they'd run it better. So I don't actually believe in the Illuminati myself, but from a fiction standpoint, it's fantastic. So of course we're going to put that in there. And at one point, people ask, well, what are you going to put in one? And I'm like, if it's public domain and you give me enough episodes or enough issues of a comic book, it'll get in there eventually. If someone owns it, then no. But if it's Dracula or Frankenstein or the works of Shakespeare or the works of Dickens or whatever, yeah, give me enough time, enough episodes, it's going to get in there, because we're going to make the Gargoyles universe inclusive of African myths and Norse myths and Greek myths and Shakespeare and King Arthur and everything, because we wanted to come up with a system where all these mythologies, all these legends, all these fictions could work together in some kind of coherent basis. And that included things like the Illuminati, and it includes things like, Midsummer Night's Dream, and whatever we could think of. If it fit, it's going in. And that includes Les Miserables or whatever. Obviously not the musical Les Miserables, because that's not public domain. But if you go back to the original novel, then that's fair game. And so in the recent Gargoyles comic, you saw a character from Les Miserables show up, and that just became one of the hallmarks of the series, was that we would try and be inclusive in that way, and we would try to bring all these mythologies and all these legends and all these stories and see if we could find a coherent way to make it fit. And we would do that. When we started the show, we set the first flashback in the first episode is set in 10th century Scotland. And we chose Scotland because all right, we wanted our characters to arrive in Manhattan speaking English. Now, if you think about it for 10 seconds, you realize, well, wait, in medieval Scotland, they weren't speaking contemporary English. They were speaking some form of Celtic Gaelic or whatever, Scottish
Right.
Gaelic. But you needed suspension of belief for your audience. So if we had said it in Paris, which is where, when you think of Gargoyles, you think of Hunchback of Notre Dame and you think of Paris, and that's where you really think of Gargoyles for the most part. But if we said it there, it's like, well, wouldn't they be speaking French? Well, if you said it in anywhere in Great Britain, you at least get the benefit of the doubt,
Right.
that suspension of belief. And we chose Scotland over England because we thought, well, Scotland is further to the north. It's further from quote unquote civilization. This is a very Western oriented viewpoint, I'll admit, but we weren't thinking that way back then. And so it'll seem more believable that humans and gargoyles were living and working together back then. What about Vikings? Vikings are cool.
Right.
It's not like we did any research and said, oh, it should be Vikings. Well, after the fact, we started doing research and we found out to our surprise the Vikings were attacking the west coast of Scotland in the 10th century. And I'm like, oh, we got it right by accident. All right, since we got it right, let's continue to get it right. So I had people, my assistant and a friend of mine who was interested in Scottish history, I had them look up all this history of the era. And we came up with these amazing stories that were historic, true stories. I'm like, well, we got to use this. We got to use this. The true story of Macbeth is in some ways way more interesting than Shakespeare's version. As much as I love Shakespeare's Macbeth, the actual history of Macbeth is even more fascinating. So we use that. And so, we're always inserting these fictional gargoyles characters and stuff, magic and other things, but we weren't contradicting any of the history. The history books might have left things out, like they left out the gargoyles, because that was, that would be like including tales of witchcraft or something like that. But where there were historical facts, we stuck by them, and I've continued to do that as much as I possibly can 30 years later in the comic books.
6 legs.